If you've ever felt frustrated or overwhelmed by business advice that just doesn't seem to work for you in your education business, then you're not alone. I've often met clients who have worked with kind of generalist business coaches or followed widely shared advice, which can be great. It can be so good learning from other industries. But the tough part is that piece that's missing, because a lot of that business guidance isn't created with the realities of running a tuition business or an education business in mind. It's general, it's designed for everyone, and it makes sense. Advice that works for a hair salon or an online store won't necessarily work for a private tutor or a course creator. Even within our sector, no two businesses are the same. You might teach the same subject to someone else, but your style, your goals, your ideal working rhythm, all of that might be completely different. So in this episode, I'm breaking down 5 pieces of advice, common business advice, that need to be reframed for us. And I'll show you how to think about them in a way that actually really helps you build a business that fits you and your clients. If it's your first time here, welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm Sumantha McMahon, and I specialise in helping tutors and edupreneurs make more money without compromising their time and the impact that they make, all in a way that's sustainable, so they're not this kind of slave to their business. So before we dive into each piece of advice, I want to say this. Much of the business guidance out there isn't wrong. It just needs reshaping to fit our kind of work and our goals. As education business owners, we often have quite unique dynamics, different types of clients and personal goals that don't always align with traditional models. So rather than following advice blindly or dismissing it altogether, today is about looking at it through a more useful lens, one that helps you create that advice, reshape that advice in a way that feels really aligned for you. So the first piece of advice that I'm going to look at is the whole define your target audience. Now, this advice is everywhere for really good reason. It's a great place to start. It's one of the fundamentals. But things are often more nuanced in the education space because often we're working with more than one audience. So you may teach students, but it's the parents who make the decision and handle the payment. So they're kind of your audience as well, but you still have to resonate with the student and their needs. That's very different, for example, to when I've got this hat on and I'm speaking to people who are not just the decision makers and the purse string holders, but they're also the people who are actually going to work with me. They are the people who have the problems, and so I connect with them in a slightly different way. That's just one typical example of something in our niche, but it's even things like how people respond to certain language. Recently, I was talking to my clients about changing the terminology of a discovery call, calling it something else, because that's what resonates with what they're offering and what their clients are going to react to. So you've got all these little things that really shape things. We are thinking about the education system in the country that you're in and the challenges and the things that people are frustrated with and issues with budgets and support that people can get from councils. All of this gets thrown into the mix, which is why the generic advice has to be looked at and it has to be molded. But also, that standalone advice of defining a target audience needs to be blended with considering how you want to work. Otherwise, you can end up in a bit of a mismatch. For example, if you want to run blended learning programs, but your ideal audience is are disengaged learners, that setup may not suit them. So a better approach is to consider both your audience and your delivery preferences side by side. I'm using delivery preference as an example, but the other factors that you need to take into the mix. Then you can look at what needs adjusting, whether it's aligned, whether you need to take a totally different approach. Sometimes when I speak to people, they're in a situation where they realize they need to change their target audience or they need to change what they're actually offering or how they're approaching it. The second thing I'm going to challenge is build something scalable or chase passive income. This one is everywhere and it's very alluring. It's really nice to feel like, oh, I can just make money in my sleep, or I can scale this so that, I could sell it in the future, or it doesn't matter how many more clients I have. It doesn't increase how much I have to work. All of that's very alluring. But how we do it and the options available to us is what makes the difference. Also, our goals. So I know a lot of people who will use this kind of approach of, I'm going to create a digital resource and I'm going to sell that. But they then haven't taken into account that when you sell a digital resource, people buy it once. They're not going to buy the same thing multiple times. Also, they don't tend to sell for a lot of money. Obviously, it's context dependent, but generally speaking, a digital resource like an ebook or a set of worksheets or exam papers, there's only so much you can charge for that in terms of what people will pay. So there you are having to focus on the quantity of sales. You need a lot of sales to make that worthwhile and to bring a solid passive income, if you like, into your business. But then, of course, that principle of passive income being making money in your sleep no longer is true, because you have to build your audience. You need to have a big audience. You need to be selling it. You need to be creating. So it's never quite as straightforward as it might appear on the surface. But also, we have to take into account, is that even what I want to spend my time doing? Do I want to spend time creating, building an audience, selling? Is that my thing? It might be your thing, in which case you're like, great, I'm going to go for this. But you do need to think about how that can be shaped for your business and whether it dilutes your messaging and what you're trying to offer, or whether it complements it as well. And with things like scalability, that can be great, but it may not always be the right goal for you. You might be on a more growth track rather than a scaling track. I've worked with lots of clients who were actually perfectly happy with their one-to-one model until they came across this advice. Suddenly they were panicking that they were doing it wrong. But if you're happy with how you work and if it's working for you, then that's success. It's your definition of success. Maybe you want to make it more lucrative in other ways, but maybe you don't want to scale. And even if you do want to scale, the solution needs to align with your preferences and your clients' needs. So a better approach is to start with what you want, then assess the scalability options based on your clients, your offer, and your capacity. The third piece of advice is launching before you're ready. This is often sold as a confidence builder, just get it out there. But there is a difference between not being perfect and not being ready. I once launched a high ticket course before it was fully developed, and I really regretted it. And it's not because I launched before it was ready. I launched before I was ready and confident that this is what I wanted to do and that this would work. When I created the Tutors Mastermind, I took a more phased approach. I spoke about it actually last week. I spoke about it privately with my clients before launching it publicly, and I refined the offer and I gradually added features. And even now, 4 years on, it's going through another evolution. It's going through another development. So I'm not waiting for perfection. If I waited for perfection, it never would have launched. So there's a difference between launching before you're ready and launching before it's perfect. You need to be ready. You need to be confident, and you need to have done the background work so that launching isn't stressful. But you also don't need to wait for it to all be set up and perfect and, everything to be polished before you launch it. So a better approach is to launch when it's ready, not when it's perfect, and when you're ready. Phase your rollout if that makes you feel safer so that you're confident and your clients are looked after every step of the process. Advice number 4 is that you need a logo and a website before you can launch. This holds back so many new business owners because creating a logo, creating a website is such a time drain. The reality is, when you are first building up your brand, when you are first launching, your logo isn't the thing that people are going to remember, especially in this world where we are pretty saturated with lots of adverts. We're not at the level of McDonald's where all you need to see are those golden arches and you know what it means. So a logo can be great, but it's not necessarily the very first thing you need to be able to launch either. Equally, with something like a website, it's a big time drain. It can be a big expense. With so many options online nowadays, it's about having a digital presence. So unless your business model relies on a website, so for example, you might be selling resources, you don't necessarily need a website. I'll give you an example of one of my clients, Dwight. He launched during the pandemic. He didn't have a website, didn't have a logo. He got fully booked within 6 months, mainly through his Facebook group and word of mouth. It worked then for him. I'm not saying that would necessarily work for someone launching right now because things have changed. The point is, he didn't have a website, he didn't have a logo, and to this day, he still does not have a website. Now, you can reinvest the money that you're making back into a website if you want one. It's not a bad thing. I've always had one. But the point is, it's probably not the very first thing you need to spend your money on. It's probably not the very first thing you need to worry about. And this isn't just for new business owners. This could be for something you want to launch, like a new idea. It doesn't necessarily need to have a fancy landing page. You can launch without one. Again, as long as it's not relying on having a landing page. The point I'm making here is to really make sure that you're prioritizing the right things before you launch something and not letting the wrong things delay you or stop you. So a better approach could be to focus on the activities that really connect with your potential clients quickly. Your website can come later once your core offer, your marketing, your messaging, all of that's working for you. The fifth piece of advice is that if you have a great service, people will find it. It's the whole build it and they will come principle. We so wish this were true, but for most people, it really isn't. For some people, it was true, but it wouldn't be true now because things have changed. Consumer behavior has changed. The way algorithms work have changed. The way we are surrounded by adverts and all of that has changed. So the whole landscape is different. The whole build it and they will come isn't a robust approach. A great offer means very little if no one knows about it. I often see people putting loads of energy into something really amazing, creating something amazing, but forgetting to map that customer journey. So there's no plan for how people will discover the offer, get excited, and eventually buy. Doesn't have to be complicated, it just needs to exist. So a better approach is to treat your marketing and sales plan as an essential, not optional. And it's just a journey, you're just mapping out a journey. It doesn't have to be complicated, it doesn't mean you need loads of things in place. It doesn't even have to be taking over your life and taking over your time. You just need a clean plan so that you can be confident that where you've created something amazing, you know that people are warming up to it. You know there's a demand for it. And if you want a bit more on that, listen to last week's episode because I really dive into how to kind of stress test an idea, how to launch with paying clients from day one rather than launching something and then waiting for those clients to come in. So have a listen to that if you want a bit more on that topic. Okay, I'll do a little wrap up. Let's recap those 5 pieces of advice that we've reframed. The first thing is to define your audience and your offer at the same time. The second is to scale only if it suits your goals and your audience. Third is to launch when it's ready and you're ready, not before, and separating that from perfection. The next is to prioritize visibility over branding assets early on. The next one was to build a strong customer journey, not just a strong offer. If any of those reframes resonated with you, then just take a moment after this episode to note what you need to change or revisit in your business. Don't try changing everything all at once, just one step at a time. Because when you take small, impactful action, it kind of knocks over the rest. It just unlocks the rest. So thanks as always for listening. Please do leave a review or press subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And I hope this episode helped you. As always, you'll hear from me on Wednesday for a Mindset PS episode.